Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Fortified Life podcast, where we talk about building a dependency on Jesus in the marketplace. I'm your host, Jason Davis, aka Mr. Fortify. Every week, we have the opportunity to bring on coaches, authors, speakers, trainers, influencers, all those who are also passionate about putting God back in business. And, folks, this week it is no different. I'm very excited because our guest this week is a man of wisdom, and he certainly is a mentor of mine. Before I bring him on, let me introduce him to you. Dr. Johnny Walker is a master facilitator, speaker, trainer, author, and the president of Character Incorporated, a global behavior change firm based in Atlanta, Georgia, with offices in Los Angeles, Trinidad, and Dubai. Johnny received his undergraduate degree from Samford University, double majoring in religion and sociology. He earned his master's degree in agency counseling from the University of Alabama in Birmingham. Before entering corporate America, Johnny spent over 15 years in law enforcement in Alabama with two different agencies. During this time, he developed two divisions in the police department, led a drug team, and served as the SWAT team's hostage negotiator. While in law enforcement, it gets better, ladies and gentlemen. He is a bivocational minister and ran a counseling practice focused on assisting youth and families. He's worked with a ton of Fortune 500 companies, Coca-Cola, Yamaha, Delta, Johnson and Johnson, and a host of others. But ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Fortified Life, Johnny Walker. Johnny, what is going on?
Hey, thanks for being here. When people read my bio, I always think I want to meet that guy. Uh, it's That's a lot of stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. That's
That's
actually a great place to start, Johnny. Certainly when I read it, but I know listeners, as you're listening to that, you're like, man, I heard at least three or four things which singularly in its own track has its own backstory. But just give us a little rundown, Johnny, professionally. I know we heard it in the bio, but people don't know the connective tissue
sure.
that God used to weave all those together. So
And
give us the backstory.
I think that's a great way to explain it. I often tell young people, and I've done counseling and coaching with young people, teenagers and college students for good night. I'll be uh, 56 soon, and that's 37 years. Crazy. And I always tell them, don't worry about when you're entering into college because everyone likes to ask you, what are you going to be? What are you going to be? I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Obviously, from my resume, it looks like that. I know what God has me doing today. But I went to Samford to prepare for ministry. God called me in the ministry when I was 16. He literally told me to go to Samford University. I had to go look it up. I didn't know it existed. And so as I'm there, here I am preparing for ministry. And suddenly I realize, after I graduate, before I graduated, people are like, hey, come be our youth minister. Hey, come be our pastor of our small church. But because I didn't immediately go to seminary, this is in the 80s, or I graduated in 1990 from Samford, suddenly no one would hire me. No one
Mm.
even would entertain my resume. And so, I just continued seeking God on this. And I finally said, God, I've done all I can the church way. I'm just going to do what I want to do for a job. And if it's the wrong one, shut the door. And I don't remember signing up for the police officer exam. I actually remember being down there, but I don't remember someone telling me to go do it. I just remember a small bit of my memory of signing up for it months and months and months before this prayer. The next day, I get a postcard in the mail, and it says, your police officer exam is tomorrow. And I looked at the date; it had been
Oh,
lost in the mail for 2 months.
wow.
And so I go down there. I do great on it. I get on the list. I end up, becoming a police officer. And a lot of people kept asking me, especially my buddies from Samford, and even Samford itself, when are you going to go into full-time ministry? And, at first I felt bad because I was believing the lie that I wasn't in ministry. And this is before
Mm.
marketplace ministry really became a thing. And God showed me through this time. And there were times I was bivocational as a youth minister. I had a counseling practice at one point, and I was doing all three of those. That was really burning the candle at three ends. But at some point, God showed me that I was in ministry. And when people would ask me that, I would say, how many battered women did you minister to today? How many
Mm.
drug addicts or drug dealers have you ministered to today? And they would just look at me and I'd say, please stop judging my ministry. I'm not judging yours. I'm not demanding that your ministry be mine, be like mine. You can stand behind a pulpit and preach, and that's a wonderful thing. But just because I'm not doing that every single week doesn't mean I'm not in ministry. And so God started changing this mindset in me that ministry is just simply meeting needs, and God is going to place you wherever He has you. And so as I was going through all this, I was working 3 jobs and basically was going backwards about 5 grand a year. And
Mm.
my wife stayed home. She homeschooled the kids. We have 4 children right now. Their ages 31 to 19. So there's big gap between them. And I had to do something different with my talents. And one of the great things that the Second Police Department in Pell City, Alabama did for me, it was one, lower pay. That wasn't great, but from where I was before. But they gave me opportunity to develop a couple of divisions of the police department, develop their standard operating procedures, work with, the school board, work with the city council, and do a lot of these different things. Gave me an opportunity to run a drug team and come up with unique and innovative ways to engage in that, and that was very successful. And so, what I learned about myself and what God taught me was I have some really unique skills that He has given me. And so then, as we were looking at, we've got to do something. We can't keep refinancing the house every 4 years. Even though we built it and we had a lot of equity in it at the time, we couldn't keep doing that. There was a time limit on that, and so I started looking to use my talents and abilities in the marketplace while still staying in ministry. So I moved my counseling practice to Atlanta, Marietta, Georgia, Northwest Atlanta, and started working there on the weekends. Kept working in my counseling practice in Alabama during the week. Kept policing, looking for a job in Atlanta, and found one and a sales. And so I moved everything over. And so from there, I was very successful using, my dad was partnering with Integrity Solutions, taught me integrity selling, values-based selling, knocked it out of the park with that. After 5.5 years, a startup grabbed me and paid me good money to work with them. And I built another sales funnel for them. They sold that company out from underneath me. And I thought, God has enabled me to develop multi-million-dollar sales funnels. I don't need $1 million. I'm going to start my own company.
Mm.
And what happened was I started a coaching company. Within weeks, my father had an accident on his bicycle, ended up in ICU. And his short-term memory was a little bit jarred when he got out. And he's okay. And he's still alive today and doing well. But he called me and he said, we've always talked about working together. And maybe God had all of this happen all at the same time with you starting your own company and this happening to me, that we could work together. And so I went home and my wife said, what did your dad want? And I said, well, he wants me to go in the training business with him. And she said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't want to be a trainer. I want to help people. And she goes, but what are you going to do? I said, well, he
Mm.
needs the help. I'm going to do that. So I went to the first facilitator certification with Integrity Solutions. And my wife and I were talking after the second day. And she says, well, how's it going? I said, this is what we're doing. This is basically coaching to groups. And I can impact so many more people with a values-based process and than I could one-on-one. And so from there, I've partnered with them so that I'm not an employee. I started developing, I had to have my own company, and I started developing my own programs, foundational core values, coaching for impact, serving for impact, and some others. And we still sell and facilitate theirs. But it's just kind of grown, and I do some content creation for them. And God just continues to show me how to use my talents and abilities differently to impact more and more people.
Wow, that is so good, Johnny. Just the tapestry that God weaves together in all our lives. Johnny, you mentioned something because as we know here in the show, ladies and gentlemen, the personal bleeds into the professional and vice
Right.
versa. You mentioned something that I think a lot of people either find themselves in or maybe they actively choose to do it. And you mentioned burning the candle from opposite ends. And for you, it was three different
Yeah, I
candles.
popped it up in the middle too, that
How
wick.
did you even how does one even go about navigating that, Johnny? Because I feel like, we've got the gig economy now and everything
Sure.
is, multiple streams of income
Yeah.
but so how does one even go about navigating that?
That's a great question. So before my dad was in the people training business for selling and service and things like that, he was in training for time management. So I grew up in a lot of this, and I was very blessed to have an amazing father and mother. I actually shared a counseling office with my mother for years. Got to work with both of my parents. It was very unique. But my father taught me time management, and that's the key in balancing your family. I was policing in the town I worked in, and so we had a great department. So on Saturday when I was working, we would take turns watching each other's beats, take lunch so you could watch your kid play baseball, that kind of thing. Um, and but the time management piece is key. I think sometimes, and a lot of people just aren't willing to do the work it takes to get to that next level. I mean, often people say professionals do what other people aren't willing to do.
Mm,
And so I was always reading, I was always studying something different. I mean, there was a time where I went back to get my master's degree. I quit one of my three jobs, I quit one of the part-time jobs and made going back to school that. I went 1 and 2 classes at a time and paid for it cash. And so not to get into debt. And it took time to do that.
mhm.
But you have to be really, you have to have the vision. You have to know exactly what, the next step you're going to do. You're not going to have the complete vision. God doesn't do that. It would be nice, that, oh, I see it all and I know everything. I know the next 10 steps. God basically gives you a flashlight that does, one of those little peewee flashlights that you can see just enough in front of you to trust him to take the next step. But you have to take those steps.
Mhm.
And you don't see what is way down there. But that's good too, because if you saw the scary monsters that were down there, you'd run.
Yeah.
But that scary monster is further down the path and where God's going to take you, you're going to deviate around it. And so it's good that we don't see it all, but sometimes you have to burn the candle at both ends, but you need to balance it with your family. You need to make sure that, spouses are on board. And, I made sure the whole goal was for my wife to stay home with the kids, to homeschool the children. Anytime I was at home, the whole family was there. We could go on vacation anytime we wanted to because of homeschooling when they were younger. And so my schedule became the family schedule. And so it was
Mm,
really a lot of partnership with my wife, a lot of sacrifice on her end as well. But it really does boil down to time management. And now with cell phones, having your calendar there, my dad calls it time activating. You don't just have an
mm,
idea of what you're going to do. You look at it. Is this what have to be done today? If it does, you put it in your calendar. You time activate it. If it doesn't need to be done today, you can put it in your calendar for tomorrow or the next day. But a lot of time management, a lot of collaboration with my
yeah.
wife and trusting God on the next steps. And where I am today, I never would have thought the path that I ended up taking was the path. And so you have to trust that God is not crazy in that,
Mm,
because I mean, let's be honest, we think that he is sometimes like that. I don't think this is it. And
right.
so trusting God and that my way is crazy, his way is not. His way is always true. And he will take us through some very painful things because we learn more through those. In fact, we learn
Mm,
faster through those. So stop expecting that everything's going to be, rainbows and unicorns and everything's going to be wonderful and, tiptoeing through the tulips. It's not that. And so
yeah.
when you're going through the rough times, and the biggest one is sticking with your values, knowing your foundational core values, knowing who you are. And I believe those are part of God's image on humanity. And when we become Christians, we get the complete image of God, the fruit of the Spirit. All those are values. But these are our guardrails for how to engage the world. And so, no matter if you're angry, frustrated, you follow these so that how
Mm,
you're handling this bad situation, your emotions don't make it worse.
yeah.
And so when I followed my values, things weren't perfect, but they were better. When I followed my emotions, things fell apart drastically. And that my
Mm.
story has a lot of falling apart in it, which is, it's not fun to talk about, but we all have it. And so you're
Yeah.
going to make mistakes. They're not failures as long as you learn from them. So you just got to keep going.
Absolutely. Folks, I told you he was a man of wisdom. Johnny,
Now,
you started, you kind of
God gives
started
wisdom.
letting
We
me
just get
know.
to
Yeah,
share it, but thank you.
it's true. Johnny, you were kind of laying little seeds throughout and talking about your professional experience. In your opinion, you probably have many that you can think of, but what was probably a major turning point in your life for you that really shaped everything, family, personal, professional, and was really like you can go back and mark, they say X marks the spot. And even if you've got a dozen of them, was there maybe one or two that was like, wow, when I think
Yeah.
about it and what God did, everything changed after that?
Yeah. So my dad was in Birmingham with a client. He called me, um, and I was working at this police department. And this was probably 2006, winter, early, February, something like that. And he calls me to do dinner. I said, come to the house. He goes, I don't have time. I got to get home, but meet me on the highway. So I met him on the highway and he asked me how things were going. And I was complaining, gripe, 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 gripe. I didn't like this. I didn't like that. The captain had just rearranged my schedule and I didn't like that. And my dad looked at me and he said, you would be great at doing what I do. I've said this to you for years. You'd be amazing at it. He said, but you would need to get your own stories and, go out and take some risks and practice these principles and this and that. And then he said, and I'm going to back up a second, but he said, when you were in high school, I made, and he gives me this number. Now, when I was in high school and I asked my dad how much money he made, he was from the generation of Nunya business. That's the, and so he would never tell me. So I just assumed because we weren't extravagant. We had old cars. I didn't wear polos and Izods back in the 80s. So I just assumed, I don't know, $70,000. And
Mhm.
so I just, in the absence of truth, any lie will do. Well, sitting at dinner in 2006, many, many, many years later, he gives me this number that was well into the six figures. And I said, excuse me? He said, how do you think I paid for cash for your college and your sister's college and your brothers to go to private school and for them to go to college? I just managed the money differently. We had the money. We just didn't spend it on cars and clothes. And I don't remember anything else he said. It was like Charlie Brown's teacher. And so I'm driving home totally dissatisfied because in 3 jobs, I'm making just under $70,000. So
Mm.
I'm feeling like I've arrived. And this was all subconscious. I had no idea that I had this belief, this false belief that this was my capability. Well, suddenly, knowing what my dad did, my capabilities in my mind grew. When I pulled up at the house, we had built this house. We were going to be building a house every 2 years, use the capital gains to build the next one, eventually own our house outright. We stopped after the second house. This house was the same size of the house I grew up in. And so what happened
Mm.
is I had this subconscious motivation when I wasn't making the $70,000 back in the 90s and early 2000s. When I was living in a smaller house, I had all this, motivation to make it back to the level of economic standard that I grew up in. And this was not conscious. This was all subconscious. And suddenly it hit me that I was limiting God. I was limiting my family. I was limiting myself by these
Mm.
false beliefs and my belief in what I was capable of. Because if your dad's capable of it, you are. That's how we kind of think, My daddy can do it, I can do it, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so that was a huge turning point for me in realizing and this is what I realized, I am not using the gifts God has given me to the best of my ability. And it wasn't about money, it was about resources
Yeah.
because we didn't up our, when I made more money, we didn't just up our spending like most people do. We upped a little bit. We bought some nicer things for the kids and we added vacations, but we gave a lot of money away as the Holy Spirit led us to, as the Holy Spirit said, hey, give here, give there. And sometimes that giving was in a check in an amount that it was like, I don't know where I'm going to pay the bills next month. And you're having me
Mhm.
write this check. So, but that was a turning point for me in belief about who I was, what I was capable of, and God just suddenly, in almost in an instant, connected all those dots in my head. The Holy Spirit just kind of said, look at all the things that I've been having you do. And now what can you do with that? What can you do with this experience? And how can you benefit your family? And how can you benefit other people? And literally I set a goal to be working having a sales job by January 1st, 2007. I was stupid because no one's open January 1st, 2007. But January 2nd, I was standing in Marietta, actually. God even brought me back so I could stay with my folks some while I traveled, while we sold the house in Alabama. I'm standing in Marietta, Georgia, north of Atlanta on January 2nd of 2007. So, yeah.
Very cool. I love that our capacity and our capability, but God, seeing it through a God lens,
Mm,
that's powerful. I love that. And Johnny, that's actually that sets us up perfectly to take us into the work that you do with
sure.
clients. So as a corporate trainer, as an executive coach, we heard some of the companies in your bio, but you're big on values. So,
Mhm.
what sets apart the type of training and coaching that you do with these
Yeah.
different companies and executives?
Yeah. So everything we do is values based. I mean, there are two godlike traits that all humans have in common. I've even stood in a Muslim country north of Dubai in the UAE in Sharjah and said, in front of Muslims, our creator has created us with two godlike traits. The first is values. We all want to be treated by values. The second is purpose. We're all desperately seeking meaning. And everyone just nods their, yeah, they nod their head. And we all define these the same. I had them define integrity and then discuss it, and it all comes back. But the same or very similar. And so I believe that this is God's imprint on humanity, and it helps us to navigate a very fallen world. And he
Mm,
knew this in advance when he created us. But what we do is we take values and we create values based processes so that because everyone wants to be treated by values, we want to train people in a values based process that will keep them on track. So they do what they do on their best day, whether it's sales or communication or service or coaching their people and leadership. They can do what they do on their best day more often, more consistently, and more effectively. And so having a process, I screw it up all the time. I fail to follow a process that I wrote from time to time. But when I do, here's the beauty of a process. All you have to do is get back to it. Admit
mm,
that you're wrong. Being willing to be wrong is a big piece of it. But say, you know what? My emotions are getting the best of me, and I'm going to go back and follow this values-based process that brings out the best parts of me. And so
mm,
they work because they're intrinsic in everyone. We train people globally, and they work in every culture, with every ethnicity and every religion, sexual orientation. None of that matters because we all desire to be treated by values. And so we have, we partner with Integrity Solutions to do integrity selling, integrity service, integrity coaching, integrity communication. We've developed to chase after some smaller companies because some big companies they can afford a lot of training. Some smaller companies can't. So we're developing some trainings that are more focused on the values piece and really more specific to the values piece, where Integrity's is values based, ours is the Impact series is values focused. So we
mm.
have coaching for impact and serving for impact, and we're going to be creating communicating for impact and selling for impact to reach out to some of these smaller companies or people that just have their own business, and we're going to make them self-deployable. And so we're developing an LMS to do that.
Very, very cool, Johnny. You made me think about something, um, just values being the lifeblood. We all know what happened 3 years ago. Johnny, there's no secret with the COVID-19
Oh yeah,
pandemic, and then you had a lot of racial injustice, you had economic uncertainty. In companies, it's almost like now companies are kind of reevaluating and getting back into, okay, what do we want to do for training and for our employees or for our
sure.
executives? So what trends have you noticed within organizations of where they want to go or where they're seeing deficiencies with their employees or teams?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing right now is this DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm,
Unfortunately, it's we're seeking equity by making things less equitable for others. And when that stuff happened with Donald Trump and the assassination attempt, and I saw stuff that it means didn't earn it. I mean, so there's a lot of negativity around this stuff, and I'm not, whether people agree with that or not, it's just not, it's not good. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion, people are afraid to say, hey, I'm feeling like I'm not equal because we're trying to elevate some people and we're devaluing some others. And the solution, a company asked me this, and they didn't like my answer. I said, let me tell you a very simple answer. It's values.
Mhm.
If my foundational core values are integrity, truth, faith, family, and respect. All right. Those are the 5 that are the most important to me, that can help me make great decisions on a daily basis, keep me in check. I'm willing to be held accountable to them. If I followed those and how I treated someone and how I treated everyone, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of, what class they were, as far as, are they the president or the CEO, or are they, you know, the low man on the totem pole. If I treated the janitor the same way I treated the CEO by my values, that is true equity. That's
Mm.
you're treating, I mean, everyone gets the same type of interaction from me.
Yeah.
And again, a values-based process, not just talking about, yeah, that would be great, but having a process that can hold you accountable to that
Mhm.
becomes important. And I think that's where the church misses it. I mean, it's almost like we're talking about these ideas, out in space, up in the heavens, and yeah, we should be more like them. But there are processes of how we should treat people, processes on how we should um, disagree with people,
Mhm.
and how we engage them in using the fruit of the spirit, which are all values. So Christians have an advantage over non-Christians, but we don't take advantage of it. We
Mhm.
act like these are things I have to earn. These are things, oh, I'm not a patient person. Let me tell you something. It's like walking down the aisle of a supermarket. You can scoop from the left-hand side of the aisle, which is emotionalism, which is what we normally do to any given situation, or we can sweep from the right-hand side, which is the fruit of the spirit and truth and values and all these wonderful things. What do we fill in our basket with that we're going to use in how we engage this situation? So now my wife looks at me when I say, I am not a patient person, especially when I'm driving in Atlanta. And she
Mhm.
smiles and she says, oh, no, sweetheart. God has given you all the patience you need. You're just not accessing it. And I'm
Mm.
like, and that's really it. So when you take this back to something like diversity, equity, and inclusion, if we teach people a process, no one is offended if everyone's held accountable to the same process. Doesn't matter what color your skin is, doesn't matter what your religion is, it doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is. Everyone is going to be accountable to treating people this way. I think that is true. Equity and inclusion, and the diversity part. We want to celebrate diversity, the different talents and abilities, and even cultures, and what we can teach each other. Those are wonderful things. And so differences, you know, are important, but if we just celebrate differences, then we don't have unity. United we stand,
Yeah.
divided we fall. And so,
Yeah.
how do we balance this? And I think God gave it to us in values. And then in purpose, organizations have visions, they have purpose. And then they take missions, they have different departments. And I mean, that's how we do it. We literally use what God has given us, and it works.
It sure does. That's one of the last things Jesus said. You reminded me, Johnny. He prayed that he prayed for oneness.
Yes,
I mean, it's right there in the scripture, like your wife said, though, we gotta we have to
you got to
access it
access it.
moment
She's a
by
wise
moment.
woman.
My
She keeps
goodness.
me in line.
I love it. Well, Johnny, you've given a lot of nuggets of wisdom and you've laid out the process with which how you and your organization go about coaching and training. But there's some pretty cool stuff that you all are working on
Yeah.
coming here in 2025. So, folks, what you don't know is here on the Fortified Life, we have people that sprinkle things coming down the pathway. And so Johnny's been working, he's been cooking up some stuff. So Johnny, if you can, obviously not the whole recipe, but if we were to get a teaspoon or a tablespoon full
Yeah.
of what you all been working on, what would those new things be?
Yeah. So we're working on Character University, and the idea behind this. So right now, what we do in our training requires a facilitator, whether we train someone to train the trainer internally or bring someone in like me, which gets expensive. And small companies can't afford it. So we're going to be launching Character University. And the idea is to give them trainings in small nuggets. It's called chunking in
Mm,
retention studies. So they'll watch several videos a week. And then at the end of the week, you'll have some discussion questions. Now, if you're doing it by yourself, you need to find someone to discuss it with so that you're verbalizing what you're learning. You can bring small groups together and everyone can sign up for the same course. And then you get together once a week or at the most every 2 weeks. Don't want to go too far down the line and share how you've been applying the principles. In this way, it becomes something that is self-deployable. Now,
mhm.
they can also bring us in to do the facilitating for the follow-ups. And they can, but they can also do it by themselves. They can also hire us in to do a kickoff like we normally do now. And we can do it the same way we do now if they want to spend that money and they believe that's a valuable a way to do it and brings value to the organization. But what we want to do is we want to bring additional options for the people, the entrepreneurs, the small companies that, maybe they can't spend $20,000, $30,000, but they can spend, 3,000 on their sales team. And then they can, there'll be instructions on there on how to lead that conversation. And then they can always hire us in to coach on occasion as well. But the whole idea behind Character U is for people to be able to find processes that will help them to incorporate great character into everything that they do. And so that's what's happening. We're hoping to get our first course up there that's self-deployable by Q2. It's going to take some video work and whatnot, and we're right now working on the new LMS. So hopefully we can meet that goal.
I love it, Johnny. I'm already fired up about it, even though I can't touch it or see it. It sounds like something I'm ready to dig into. Uh, well, Johnny, as we get ready to close here, you've laid out all types of nuggets and told us your story, testimony. And now I know listeners know what you're thinking. How can I get in touch with Johnny and keep up with what he's doing? So, Johnny, how can listeners follow up with you?
Yeah, they can find us on the internet at www.characterinc.com. And they can call us at 678-888-1252. And I want to give something to the listeners. We give our values assessment away for free. So people can go to gotvalues.com, www.gotvalues.com. It'll take you to a page on our website. There's a short video. After you watch it, you register. We're not going to spam you, and it'll email you the values assessment. And it's a 2-week process, 10 minutes a day, but it'll narrow down 165 values to your 4 to 5 foundational core values. That'll help you make great decisions on a daily basis. They have to meet certain criteria. You're willing to be held accountable to them. And there's some others in there as well. But it's all there on the assessment. It's in the video. We give that away because God's image shouldn't be sold. And we want to introduce people to God's image in them. And it works everywhere. It works at home. The principles we teach, people use them at home, at work, with friends, because people are people. And so we'd love to have a conversation with any of your listeners that has an organization, or if anyone needs any executive or professional coaching.
Folks, you heard it from the man himself. You know how to get in touch with him. And what a freebie, gotvalues.com. I've taken the assessment myself, and folks, it is hugely impactful. Well, Johnny, that's all we have time for today, but in a action-packed segment, you have more than delivered value to all of the listeners today. So, Johnny, thank you for hanging out with us here on the Fortified Life podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been an honor to be here.
Absolutely. Well, folks, make sure you go to fortifiedlifepodcast.com. We'll have all of the show notes there, everything that Johnny has listed out, website, resources, phone number, values, assessment. We'll have all of that available to you. So don't you worry. Well, folks, that's all we've got time for here on the show. You know how we leave things. Don't compartmentalize your faith in the marketplace. And from the boardroom to the bathroom, God is with you. We'll see you next time on the Fortified Life podcast.